terms and helpful resource guide can help you better understand our nation's dynamic judicial system. To order your copy of Justice for All, send a check or money order for $2 to Justice for All, Post Office Box 75298, Washington, D.C. The zip code is 20013.
You're watching C-SPAN. Coming up next, we'll return to our coverage of a seminar focusing on women and the Constitution, sponsored by the Carter Center at Emory University. The featured speaker is former New York Congresswoman Geraldine Ferraro. She was the Democratic Party's vice presidential nominee in 1984.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. You're all very, very nice. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That's very touching, Linda, and I do thank you for that very, very kind introduction. I am delighted, Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Johnson, to have the opportunity to participate in the symposium this morning. I must remember that Southerners speak slowly. But with a limited amount of time, I hope you listen faster, all right? One thing Linda didn't tell you, and it's because it's very recent, and I'm very, very proud of it, is that I have just been appointed a fellow at Harvard's Institute of Politics at the Kennedy School of Government. It's the most exciting thing, but I have to tell you, as a result of it, I accordingly no longer give speeches. Politicians give speeches. Professors give lectures. Actually, the tradition and history of Harvard gives you a different perspective on bicentennials. Harvard is old. When Harvard celebrated its bicentennial, Andrew Jackson was president and only Indians were caucusing in Iowa. Before I begin my formal comments on my assigned topic, I do want you to know how important I think it is that this symposium is being held. The women who have put this event together deserve our thanks and the thanks of the delegates to the Constitutional Convention. 200 years ago, they wrote a brilliant political document that was, for more than half the population, seriously flawed. This conference is about how far we have come in correcting those flaws. It is, of course, a special pleasure because this event is being sponsored in part by the Carter Center. President Carter did more to advance the cause of women's equality than any other president this country has had. In his appointments both to the executive branch and to the courts, and the policies he pursued and the tone he set, and the convictions he held, he was an ally of the women's movement. We know that men of quality are not threatened by women of equality. Jimmy and Rosalind Carter were partners in public life just as they are in private life, and their example is one American women and men can be proud of. I also have a personal appreciation to express. In 1978, I was seeking election to the House of Representatives. It was my first run for elective office, and Queens had never before sent a woman to Congress. In a very tough race, Miss Lillian came up to my district to campaign for me. And did she give my candidacy a lift? I won, and I will always be grateful for her help. It was a wonderful example of woman helping woman into political power. I've been asked this morning to address the topic, Women in Public Office, the Opportunities. More and more women are winning elective office and assuming positions of power and authority in government and the political process. Let me say that the election of 1984 was a wonderful learning experience for me. In running for national office, you have a chance to practice politics on the highest level. And for all the differences I had and still have with President Reagan, I can only admire his skills as a politician. So, in the bipartisan spirit of this conference, I thought I would borrow one of the President's techniques and talk about the movies. If you recall, several years ago, a marvelous film won the Academy Award. It was called Chariots of Fire and told the story of Harry Abrahams, a member of the British Olympic team in 1920. After losing a race to his arch rival, a dispirited Abrahams turned, as movie heroes usually do, to the woman in his life. Feeling sorry for himself, he said, "If I can't win, I won't run." To which she responded, "If you don't run, you can't win." But he whined, "I've worked so hard, what will I aim for?" Again, she had the answer, "Beat him the next time." In that scene are two excellent pieces of advice that go to the heart of women's opportunities in politics. If you don't run, you can't win. And if you go out and work as hard as you can and you aren't successful, go out and do it again to beat him the next time. Please note that while the scene came from a movie about the athletic exploits of men, the political wisdom came from a woman. I believe it is especially important in this political year that we bring women together to talk about increasing our participation. Like the Olympics, politics gets top billing only every 4 years. For most Americans, the window of opportunity for changing attitudes opens with the Iowa caucuses and closes shortly after the returns are tabulated in November. Politics in general in this country would benefit from a longer span of public attention. And women and blacks and other underrepresented groups specifically have the most to gain if that is done. Voter apathy smiles on those who wish to preserve the status quo. And the status quo is not committed to dramatic progress on electing more women. One small indication of how far we have to go is reflected in a phone call recently received by the political director of the National Women's Political Caucus. It was from a columnist with a San Francisco newspaper. Was he calling to ask about Dianne Feinstein's future plans? No. Did he want to discuss the potential Senate candidacy of California Secretary of State Marge Pung-you? No. Well, perhaps he was calling about the impact of women in the California presidential primaries. No, none of those things. He wanted to know whether the leaders of women's organizations have taken a position on miniskirts. True. Actually, he was probably directing his question to the wrong person entirely. Men may care about miniskirts. Political women are much more interested in coattails. Women are, by any measure, grossly underrepresented in elective office. I would say shockingly underrepresented. However, nobody's shocked. That's simply how it is. In 1974, Jean Kirkpatrick wrote a book called Political Woman. Published by the Center for the American Woman in Politics at Rutgers University, it was a study of women state legislators from around the country. One of the jacket blurbs lauding the book was written by my friend Bella Abzug, and that was probably the last time Bella praised Professor Kirkpatrick's political views. In her book, Kirkpatrick wrote that she found the most important and interesting thing about women's political role was that it was so insignificant. Sure, women have always been active and enthusiastic campaign volunteers, but she wrote, half a century after the ratification of the 19th Amendment, no woman has been nominated to be president or vice president. No woman has served on the Supreme Court. At the time, there was no woman in the cabinet, no woman in the Senate, no woman serving as governor of a major state, no woman mayor of a major city, no woman in the top leadership of either party. In the 14 years since then, we have made some measure of progress. Associate Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, as we all know, and we're delighted by her speech yesterday, sits on the United States Supreme Court. And women have been represented in every cabinet since President Nixon's. 2 women serve in the United States Senate, and major cities as diverse as Houston and San Francisco have elected women mayors. Today, 2 women serve as chief executives of their state, Madeline Kunin in Vermont and Kay Orr in Nebraska. In Kentucky, where the state constitution prohibits the governor from succeeding herself, feels good. Martha Lane Collins completed her last year. And in Arizona, Secretary of State Rose Mofford, who is currently acting governor, will succeed Evan Meekum should he resign or be forced from office. We'll get him anywhere we can. According to the National Women's Political Caucus, women today hold 43 of the top statewide elective offices in the country, which comes out to roughly 14%. As we look at party leadership positions in the House of Representatives, we find Congresswoman Lynn Martin of Illinois serving as vice chair of the Republican Conference, while Mary Rose Okar of Ohio holds a corresponding position in the Democratic caucus. Congresswoman Okar is now engaged in a close contest to chair the caucus in the next Congress, a job no woman has ever held. As an interesting footnote, the position Mary Rose now holds has been called traditionally Secretary of the Caucus, and that was its title when Shirley Chisholm had it and when I had it. It has always been held by a woman, and no woman has ever gone from that position to the top spot. In this Congress, the 100th, the title of the position was changed from secretary, obviously a woman's job, to vice chair. In the next Congress, the vice chair will be Congressman Steny Hoyer of Maryland, who is running unopposed. And though Mary Rose is really going to have to fight for the position of chair, even though she has fulfilled the duties of the second spot for 4 years, if I were a betting woman, I would bet that now that the title has been changed and men are seeking the position of vice chair, it will be seen more as a stepping stone to the top job in the future. Other women have climbed onto the lower rungs of the leadership ladders in both parties in the House. But in the top jobs, Speaker, Majority and Minority Leader, Majority and Minority Whip, still no women. Of course, a woman has been nominated to the vice presidency. But no woman has been nominated or even seriously contested for the nomination of her party for President of the United States. That will not change in 1988. Pat Schroeder considered the race, and her travels around the country generated the only real enthusiasm in the campaign last summer. But after careful thought, Pat decided it wouldn't work. One reason was that 9 months before the Iowa caucuses, it was too late. Dick Gebhardt had been in Iowa since John Deere was a fawn. On the Republican side, Professor Kirkpatrick was urged by many to make the race for president. She declined, citing what she called the quote-unquote mean maleness of presidential politics, which she said, and I quote, shares a number of characteristics with some purely male competitive sports, end quote. In any event, Kirkpatrick remains high on every Republican's list of possible running mates. The debate over women as presidential or vice presidential candidates has turned chiefly on the question of qualifications. We constantly hear it asked, is there a qualified woman? To which women have responded, compared to whom? The fact is that the American electorate is accustomed to expect certain types of expertise in candidates for national office. It really doesn't hurt to be governor of a large state or to be senator of long experience. Like it or not, at this point in our country's political development, very few women hold those positions. If we look at Senator Nancy Kassenbaum's record of her 10 years in the Senate, her expertise in budget and foreign policy undoubtedly qualifies her as a national leader. And 14 years in the House of Representatives, including work on the Armed Services Committee, are enough to give Congresswoman Schroeder the necessary experience, wisdom, and political skills to be taken seriously as a presidential candidate. However, it is not realistic or reasonable to expect every woman who is qualified in that term to run for president to want to run for president. That has to be a personal decision. And right now, there just aren't a lot of women in a position even to consider a race for the White House. Now, what difference does it make if a woman runs for president? Plenty. Every time a woman runs for any elective office, it's like throwing a stone in a lake. The ripple effect is felt far beyond the immediate point of impact. In the lake of U.S. politics, the presidency is the biggest stone of all. When a woman runs, the ripple effects will be felt everywhere. I know those effects are there, even if they're hard to measure. I got a sense of it in 1984. It's the young woman writing after the election, "I've decided to go to medical school because of you. I decided if you could do it, I could do it too." It's the woman in her 80s holding onto her walker and whispering in my ear, "I never thought I would live to see this day." It's the 7-year-old writing from her school in Minnesota, "Someday I'm going to run for president." Of course, they're very smart people in Minnesota and very smart voters. There are also more specific ways in which a woman presidential candidate would make a difference. For instance, in the farm states this year, chapters of the Women's Political Caucus have been unable to concentrate their energies on organizing voters for upcoming primaries and caucuses, which is extremely important. The problem is they have been too busy helping women who have been victims of domestic violence. One of the states where the farm crisis has resulted in a dramatic increase in the incidence of domestic violence is Iowa. Every presidential candidate, both parties, talks about the farm crisis. Many speak compellingly of the need to preserve the farm family. But when it comes to speaking out on the threat to the women in those farm families, there is absolute silence. You can be sure that domestic violence is an outgrowth of the farm crisis, would find its way onto the priority list of a woman running for president. And that issue would stay on her legislative agenda once she won. In a book called In a Different Voice, Harvard professor Carol Gilligan tells us that women's voices are essential to good government. And it's not only because we're smarter, more effective, and more caring. Rather, women add another dimension to the political process. Instead of engaging in confrontation, women are more apt to negotiate. Instead of looking at short-term solutions to problems, women are more apt to think in terms of generations to come. Instead of thinking in win-lose terms, women are more apt to see the gray area in between. For all these reasons, it would be terrific if a woman were running for president. But even though no woman is in the race, we can still play an important role in the presidential elections. We can and should work to change the emphasis put on process to the detriment of substance. While we're at it, we can and should seek to shorten that process. Campaigns should not require people to put their lives on hold for 2 years so that they can personally conduct a census survey of Iowa and New Hampshire. We can and should register more women to vote. We can and should seek to reduce the importance of fundraising. The job is President of the United States, not President of the United Way. While there is no woman in the race, women hold positions of power in the campaigns of the men running for president this year, and that's progress too. Dukakis has women as campaign manager, Iowa coordinator, and foreign policy advisor, and he wins high marks on that count. But each of the other Democrats have women serving in senior positions in their campaigns. We're not talking tokenism anymore. We're talking women sharing power. On the Republican side, Dole, Bush, and Robertson, or after Iowa, Dole, Robertson, and Bush, each have women press secretaries. Kemp's political director is a woman. This is not an exhaustive list of the people who are working in campaigns who are female, but you get the idea. It does make a difference. For one thing, when women run campaigns, it affects issue priorities. It is not a coincidence that one of the areas in which George Bush is violating his self-imposed loyalty test to the Reagan agenda is women's issues, especially child care. And when women run campaigns, it changes the perception that men have a corner on the skills required for big-time political success. The women who hold positions of responsibility in presidential campaigns, whether or not their candidate is ultimately successful, will forge contacts and gain credibility that will endure beyond this election cycle. Many of them will be back with higher ambitions and sharper skills in 1992. Even better, some of the women will be with the winning candidate, and they will have greater opportunities as high-ranking officials in a new administration. And that's important, too. The current administration has widely been regarded as hostile to women's issues. That is in part because this president's inner circle of advisors, and I'm not equating that with his cabinet, have, except for his wife, been men. Now run down the list. Michael Deaver, Ed Meese, Don Regan, Howard Baker, Jim Baker, William Clark, Lynn Nofziger, Caspar Weinberger, all men. The next president will have been elected with a campaign team that included women in the inner circle. Now, we have come a long way. It was 70 years from Philadelphia to Seneca Falls, and 70 more from Seneca Falls to ratification of the 19th Amendment and the fulfillment of the suffragettes' dream. Activists of the time believed women would use the franchise to achieve certain policy ends by voting for candidates with different priorities. They were wrong. In 1920, women voted the way their husbands told them to. It took more than half a century for the gender gap the suffragettes were looking for to finally show. Beginning with Ronald Reagan's election in 1980, pollsters and election analysts noticed and reported a new phenomenon. Women, long the 98-pound weakling of American politics, were flexing their muscles. New voting patterns began to emerge. Women voted more strongly Democratic and on key issues like peace, disarmament, social welfare, and the environment. They voted differently from men. In 1984, the gender gap was seen as a possible key to a Democratic challenge against a popular incumbent president who was running in a time of peace and prosperity. Elliot Smeal's book, How and Why Women Will Elect the Next President, was based on the potential for tapping the newly independent women's vote. The premise was that if the gap persisted at the levels that had been documented, it could cost the Republicans the election. Well, it did persist. President Reagan's popularity simply overwhelmed it. The gender gap is still with us today and was crucial in the 1986 midterm elections. 9 Democrats, including 4 from southern states, 1 from the state of Georgia, and 5 from western states, won elections to the United States Senate in which they received less than 50% of the men's vote and more than 50% of the women's vote. Those women's votes have made a critical difference in the Senate. Had those races gone the other way, the Republicans would have kept the majority. Strom Thurmond, rather than Joe Biden, would have wielded the gavel at the Judiciary Committee hearings. All 9 of those Democratic senators voted against the confirmation of Robert Bork. Robert Bork was defeated by only 8 votes. Had there been no gender gap in those 9 states, had women stayed home from the polls, Judge Bork would have been confirmed, and the discussion at this symposium on the future of women's rights under the Constitution would have taken on a very different tone. As we continue to look at those midterm elections, however, we have to concede that we didn't do very well in electing women. In the 100th Congress, there are 23 women serving in the House with 412 men. 5 of the women in this Congress are new members serving their first term. That's the good news. The bad news is that even with 5 new women, we registered no net increase in women members because an equal number left. The 1986 class of women is noteworthy not only for its size, but also for the backgrounds of its members. Nancy Pelosi of California achieved what may be an historic first by winning a special election to succeed Congresswoman Sally Burton. It is routine for men to succeed men, but when a woman leaves public office, the likelihood is that a man will replace her. The other 4 had extensive experience in their respective state legislatures. The important point is what this holds for the future. The oldest catch-22 for any new job seekers to be told, we can't hire you, you don't have the experience. How are you supposed to get experience if you can't get hired or elected in the first place? The numbers of women serving in state legislatures prove that women can get elected. From 1969 to 1987, the number of women serving in those legislative bodies increased from 300 to almost 1,200. Of course, women have not yet achieved equal opportunity with men. We still have to work harder to be given a chance to prove ourselves. And voters still need to be taught that women are equally capable of handling foreign policy, national security, and economic issues. But the voters are learning. With our help, they'll get there. And then so will we. Then we will have more women in the House and in the Senate as well. And on the latter, unfortunately, the immediate prospects are not encouraging. In the last 10 years, in the elections from 1978 through 1986, 23 women ran for the Senate as the nominees of one of the major parties. 3 have won. Senator Kassenbaum of Nebraska, Senator Mikulski of Maryland, and former Senator Paula Hawkins of Florida, who was defeated in her bid for re-election. And remember, Mikulski had run statewide and lost a Senate bid in 1974. Several of the others lost narrowly. 12 got less than 40% of the vote. They ran as sacrificial lambs against powerful incumbents who were practically guaranteed re-election. Now, were those races worth running? Absolutely. Remember, if you don't run, you can't win. And just as important, every time a woman runs, women win. A greater number of women running means a greater opportunity for eventual success in making the process fair and for electing a Congress that is more representative of all the people. The 14 years since Jean Kirkpatrick wrote Political Woman have been a time of great excitement. So many more women getting involved. So many historical firsts. Reading through the directory of women in Congress, one is overwhelmed by the number of firsts. That's exciting because it says we're doing better. But what we have to remember is that when we have fewer women making history, we will have more women making policy. Now, how fast can that happen? One study pessimistically concluded that at the rate we're going, 40 years from now we'll still have only 53 women in the Congress. It isn't good enough, obviously. We need to persuade more women to run. If you don't run, you can't win. And while we're at it, we're going to have to develop the concept of politics as an honorable profession. In the meantime, women continue to make progress. Last year, for the first time ever, 2 women competed for the governorship of a state. It was in Nebraska, that hotbed of progressive feminist thought. You know what I think must be absolutely beautiful about a race like that? When both candidates are women, they can ignore all those tiresome questions about whether a woman is capable of doing the job. Obviously, if both competitors are women, a woman will win the race, and a woman will do the job. Next question. We also have to start paying attention to the kinds of goals we should be setting for ourselves. Half the House of Representatives, half the governors, a woman president. When will it happen? In this century, in our lifetime? I don't know. But I do know this. It will happen in time. I'm sure of it. But I'm also sure that it's not just a matter of time. It is a matter of work and faith and confidence, of a commitment to the idea that some leaders are born women. If you don't run, you can't win. But if you don't work and work as hard as you can, you might as well not run. Barb Mikulski did not win election to the Senate because the people of Maryland decided it was time to elect a woman to the Senate. No groundswell erupted demanding that history's injustices be righted. She won because she had built a record of achievement and distinction, first in the neighborhood of Baltimore, then in the City Council, and then in the House of Representatives. It happened because she is an outstanding politician. It happened because she has an excellent record of leadership. It happened because she has the ability to inspire people. And it just so happened that she is a woman. And that's how a woman will one day be elected president. She'll be elected not primarily because she is a woman or in spite of being a woman, but because she has won the confidence of the American people that she can lead. She will have proven herself as senior senator from Texas, or as chairwoman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, or in her bold handling of the state budget crisis as governor of Illinois. She will have shown that she possesses the rare combination of qualities the American people look for in a president. And then it will be time, and history will be made, and tears will be cried like you wouldn't believe. I'm looking forward to it. I was going to end my remarks. It's just a little wrap-up paragraph this morning. But I'm going to impose upon your time for just another 2 minutes. Because I have to tell you, I have been rather taken by the reception that I've received over the past 2 days. And so I want to share with you just a little bit about the '84 campaign. Although we lost the election, on another level, we, and the we I mean is the entire nation, won a great deal. When Walter Mondale asked me to be his running mate, we took down once and for all the sign on the door that said, door of the White House that said, men only. We helped topple an unfair and irrational barrier. I don't think I can ever express to you all that the election meant to me in personal terms. There were so many dramatic moments. Sitting with my staff in my hotel suite when the phone rang and Fritz asked me to be his running mate. Making my acceptance speech in San Francisco. And I must tell you, Linda, that was the most fascinating scene to look at. Everybody was crying. But in addition to that, it looked as if they were all women. And I found out later that what had happened was that the male alternates in many states had given their floor passes to the women, the male delegates had given their floor passes to the women alternates so that the women could be with me on the convention floor that night. It was very touching. What were equally special were the quieter moments, and those are the times that I am going to carry around with me forever. Let me tell you about what was really great in the campaign. That's the people. And again, you felt it a little bit this week. It was wonderful to have the chance to meet so many Americans face to face. I had the rare privilege of crisscrossing this country, meeting people as they led their lives, going to their homes, talking with fathers and daughters, farmers and financiers, listening to them talk about what's important to them. It was an opportunity every American should have to see our country in all its breadth, to experience the diversity that makes America so very special. I received tens of thousands of letters expressing deep and personal emotions. And I want to read a letter that I got from a Rhode Island woman with 2 young daughters, aged 4 and 2. And I want to tell you just one thing before I read the letter. Linda said to me, how do you feel about what's happening when people come up to you and ask your autograph and stuff like that? And I said, Linda, every American should have to see our country in all its breadth, to experience the diversity that makes America so very special. I received tens of thousands of letters expressing deep and personal emotions. And I want to read a letter that I got from a Rhode Island woman with 2 young daughters, aged 4 and 2. And I want to tell you just one thing before I read the letter. Linda said to me, how do you feel about what's happening when people come up to you and ask your autograph and stuff like that? And I said, Linda, you have to understand that I thoroughly enjoy the enthusiasm of the people I come in contact with. But I am fully aware that what is happening is that every woman through me is experiencing the candidacy. I also understand that it's the candidacy, not Geraldine Ferraro, and that any one of a number of women sitting in this room could have done precisely what I did. And so when I read you the letter, it's not about Geraldine Ferraro, it's about the candidacy and each one of you. I brought my girls to a rally for you in Providence, she wrote, because I wanted to show them what they could aspire to, that the possibilities for them are limitless, that they can, if they want, be president, and that being female will not preclude them